The people who laugh at the man holding the wrench are often the first to trust him when the engine stops speaking. The private aviation hangar outside Dallas shimmered beneath the bright Texas morning sun, where polished business jets rested beneath towering steel beams like monuments built for people who believed money could solve every problem. Ground crews moved with practiced precision while executives in tailored suits gathered beside a sleek white corporate jet valued at more than $60 million. Every surface reflected perfection, except for one man lying beneath the left wing with grease on his sleeves and a flashlight balanced beside his toolbox. Nathan Reed, a 35-year-old single father with dark brown hair, a strong, weathered face, and broad shoulders shaped by years of honest work, tightened one final inspection panel before placing his palm gently against the aircraft's polished skin. He closed his eyes for only a second, listening instead of looking. Then he frowned almost imperceptibly. A black luxury SUV rolled to a smooth stop outside the hangar doors. Aubrey Sinclair stepped out wearing an elegant white business suit, her blonde hair catching the sunlight as confidently as the empire she had inherited and expanded. At only 29 years old, she had become one of the youngest aviation executives in Texas, and nearly everyone around her moved faster the moment she appeared. Investors followed. Attorneys followed. Department heads followed. Respect followed. She crossed the polished floor without slowing until she noticed Nathan still working beneath her aircraft. One executive leaned toward her and whispered, "That is just the maintenance technician." Aubrey folded her arms. "Then why is my jet still sitting here?" Nathan calmly slid out from beneath the wing, wiped his hands with a clean cloth, and nodded politely. "Good morning, ma'am." She barely acknowledged the greeting. "How much longer does changing a panel take?" Nathan glanced once toward the engine intake before answering. "The panel is finished. I am listening to something else." Several managers exchanged amused smiles. Aubrey raised an eyebrow. "Listening?" Nathan nodded. "There is a vibration pattern that does not belong." Quiet laughter spread among a few executives standing nearby. One of the investors smirked. "He can hear millions of dollars talking now." Aubrey smiled faintly without hiding her skepticism. "That is certainly an interesting talent." Nathan never reacted to the laughter. He simply looked toward the aircraft once more as a technician briefly powered an auxiliary system for routine diagnostics. A soft mechanical hum echoed through the spacious hangar. Nathan listened carefully, then spoke in the same calm voice. "Please do not authorize today's demonstration flight until someone reviews the secondary flight control data." Aubrey's expression hardened. "Every engineer on my team has already approved this aircraft." Nathan respectfully replied, "I understand. I still believe something is wrong." The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat before another executive shrugged dismissively. "He fixes bolts, not flight systems." More quiet laughter followed. Nathan lowered his eyes, picked up his toolbox, and walked toward another maintenance station without defending himself. He had long ago learned that truth never became stronger by arguing. Behind him, Aubrey watched the mechanic disappear across the hangar floor, convinced she had just witnessed an ordinary worker trying to sound important. What she could not possibly know was that the quiet man she had dismissed had already noticed a hidden pattern buried inside the aircraft, one that every computer, every engineer, and every executive in the building had completely overlooked, and before the week was over, that forgotten pattern would unlock a secret worth $99 million while leaving an entire hangar standing in absolute silence. Nathan Reed drove away from the private airfield with the same quiet expression he wore every evening, as though the laughter inside the hangar had never followed him beyond its steel walls. His aging pickup truck rolled through the wide Texas highways beneath a sky painted with soft shades of orange and gold, carrying more tools than possessions and more memories than anyone could have imagined. The farther he traveled from polished jets and executive meetings, the lighter his shoulders seemed to become. 25 minutes later, he turned into a peaceful neighborhood where children played basketball in driveways, neighbors watered flower beds, and old oak trees shaded modest homes that valued warmth more than appearance. Before the truck had fully stopped, the front door opened, and a little girl hurried across the front lawn with joyful excitement. "Daddy," Grace Reed called as she wrapped her arms around him. Nathan smiled with the quiet happiness that only existed when he looked at his daughter. "How was school today?" She proudly held up a small foam airplane she had built in science class. It flew farther than everybody else's. Nathan laughed softly. Then we should celebrate with grilled cheese sandwiches. Grace nodded enthusiastically. And tomato soup? Absolutely. Inside the cozy house, family photographs rested on wooden shelves beside carefully repaired model airplanes that Nathan and Grace had assembled together over the years. Nothing inside the home suggested wealth, yet everything reflected patience, care, and love. While the soup simmered on the stove, Grace spread her homework across the kitchen table. "Did you fix another fancy airplane today?" she asked. Nathan stirred the pot before answering. "I worked on one. Did the rich people say thank you?" He paused only briefly before smiling. "Not today." Grace looked up with innocent curiosity. "That is okay. Grandma says good people do the right thing even when nobody claps." Nathan looked toward a framed family photograph resting near the window and quietly nodded. "Your grandma was a very wise woman." After dinner, Grace carried her foam airplane into the living room. "Will you help me make it fly better?" Nathan accepted the little model with practiced hands, adjusting the tiny wings by barely a fraction of an inch before tossing it gently across the room. The airplane glided smoothly before landing softly on the couch. Grace laughed with delight. "How do you always know exactly what to change?" Nathan smiled, but did not answer immediately. His eyes wandered toward a small wooden cabinet tucked beneath the staircase. After Grace ran to retrieve the airplane, he quietly opened the cabinet and removed a worn metal box. Inside rested flight logs, faded photographs, pilot wings, and a framed certificate from years earlier recognizing him as one of the most gifted experimental test pilots in the country. Beneath those papers lay another photograph showing a much younger Nathan standing beside an advanced research aircraft, smiling beside his late wife before life had changed forever. He gently closed the box before Grace returned. That chapter belonged to yesterday. Being her father belonged to today. Later that evening, after Grace had fallen asleep, Nathan sat alone on the front porch listening to the distant sound of airplanes crossing the Texas night sky. He replayed the unusual vibration he had heard inside the corporate jet, matching every subtle rhythm against years of instinct stored deep within his memory. It was not imagination. It was not guesswork. Something hidden inside that aircraft did not belong there. He quietly looked toward the stars and whispered to himself, "I hope they listen before it is too late," then rose, turned off the porch light, and walked back inside, never realizing that the forgotten skills he had locked away for his daughter's future were already beginning to pull him back toward a world he thought he had left behind forever. The next morning, Sinclair Aero Capital moved with the relentless rhythm of a company racing against time. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Dallas skyline while teams of attorneys, engineers, and financial analysts hurried between conference rooms carrying tablets filled with contracts and performance reports. At the center of it all stood Aubrey Sinclair, composed as always in a tailored white suit, reviewing the final preparations for a $99 million partnership that would determine the future expansion of her aviation company. Every minute mattered. Every delay carried a price. "The demonstration is still scheduled for 11 o'clock, her chief operations officer said as they entered the executive boardroom. Aubrey nodded. "Good. I do not want investors waiting on the ground because someone in maintenance is chasing imaginary problems." A few executives smiled politely. One senior engineer added, "Our diagnostic systems show every primary flight control operating within certification standards." Aubrey accepted the report without hesitation. Then we moved forward. At the private hangar, however, Nathan Reed had already arrived long before sunrise. The aircraft sat quietly beneath bright inspection lights while the rest of the maintenance crew prepared it for the scheduled demonstration. Nathan stood beside an open service panel, studying a stream of diagnostic numbers scrolling across a portable monitor. Everything appeared normal at first glance. Oil pressure remained stable. Hydraulic readings matched expected values. Flight computers reported no faults. Yet something continued bothering him. He replayed the subtle vibration he had felt beneath his fingertips the previous day, matching it against every sound echoing through the auxiliary power system. A younger technician walked over carrying a clipboard. "Nathan, are you still looking at that vibration?" Nathan nodded. "Yes. The computers say everything is fine." Nathan smiled gently. Computers only answer the questions we know how to ask. The younger mechanic frowned thoughtfully before looking back toward the aircraft. Nathan slowly adjusted the playback speed of recorded sensor data until one faint pattern finally appeared. Every few seconds, a tiny fluctuation emerged, so small it remained hidden inside the normal operating range. Most people would never notice it. Nathan quietly circled the data with a marker before printing the report. He carried the pages directly to the operations office inside the hangar, where flight supervisors were reviewing departure schedules. "I need this attached to today's inspection file," he said calmly. The supervisor glanced at the report for less than 5 seconds before shaking his head. Engineering already signed everything off. Nathan remained respectful. "Please send it anyway." "Nathan, we cannot delay a demonstration because of a feeling." "It is not a feeling." He pointed toward the printed graph. "This oscillation should not exist." The supervisor sighed. "Even if you are right, the executive team is not postponing a $99 million presentation over a maintenance recommendation." He placed the report beneath several other folders without another glance. Nathan watched silently for a moment before thanking him and walking away. He had done everything procedure required. Across the airfield, Aubrey greeted investors as they stepped from luxury vehicles, speaking confidently about innovation, precision, and trust. Cameras captured every handshake while business reporters prepared interviews celebrating the company's newest milestone. None of them noticed the maintenance report quietly buried beneath a stack of paperwork inside the operations office. None of them realized that the calm mechanic who had tried to warn everyone was already returning to the aircraft one final time, not because anyone had believed him, but because his conscience refused to leave unanswered questions behind. Sometimes the greatest burden carried by an honest person is not being ignored. It is knowing the truth while watching everyone else hurry past it. By mid-morning, the private hangar had transformed into a stage where every detail had been polished for the arriving investors. The white business jet gleamed beneath brilliant overhead lights, while presentation screens displayed performance charts and future expansion plans. Cameras were positioned beside the aircraft, assistants adjusted seating arrangements, and aviation consultants spoke confidently about innovation and precision. Aubrey Sinclair welcomed each guest with the calm confidence of someone who believed every variable had already been controlled. Standing nearby, the chief flight crew prepared for the scheduled systems demonstration that would showcase the aircraft before the afternoon presentation. Nathan Reed remained at the edge of the hangar beside an open maintenance console, watching streams of diagnostic information continue to scroll across the monitor. The tiny fluctuation he had noticed earlier still appeared every few seconds, almost invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look. It was not becoming worse, but it was not disappearing either. Nathan quietly compared the live readings with archived performance data stored in the aircraft maintenance records. The numbers looked almost identical until he isolated one narrow frequency range. There it was again. The same subtle pattern, the same irregular rhythm hidden beneath thousands of normal calculations. He slowly exhaled and carried his tablet toward the lead flight engineer. "Please compare this frequency with the backup flight control synchronization," Nathan said politely. The engineer glanced at the display before shaking his head. The system already passed every certification test. Nathan remained patient. "I know. That is why this concerns me. You are chasing decimal points." Nathan answered softly. "Sometimes decimal points become very expensive." Before another word could be exchanged, the demonstration began. The flight crew powered the aircraft while guests gathered around large display monitors showing real-time system information. Instead of taking off, the team conducted a complete ground-based operational simulation, allowing investors to observe the aircraft's advanced digital flight management system in a controlled environment. At first, everything appeared flawless. Hydraulic pressure remained stable. Navigation systems synchronized correctly. Control surfaces responded within expected parameters. Several investors smiled with satisfaction. Aubrey folded her arms, clearly pleased. Then one of the engineers frowned. "Run that sequence again," he said quietly. The simulation repeated. Once again, a tiny delay appeared between two secondary control responses. It lasted less than a fraction of a second before disappearing. Most people in the room never noticed it. Nathan did. "Freeze the playback," he called calmly. The room turned toward him. One executive sighed with visible impatience. Not again. Nathan walked closer to the display without raising his voice. Enlarge Channel 7. The technician hesitated before following the instruction. A narrow waveform expanded across the monitor. Now compare it with Channel 11. Another graph appeared. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The lead engineer leaned closer to the screen. Those signals should be synchronized. Nathan nodded once. They are drifting. Aubrey stepped forward, her confident expression beginning to fade. Can that happen during normal calibration? The engineer slowly shook his head. No. Nathan pointed toward another data window. Someone added an adaptive control layer that is not documented in the certified software package. The room fell completely silent. Investors who had been discussing contracts only moments earlier now stared at the monitor without speaking. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. Nathan looked at the unfamiliar code displayed beneath the flight control data and quietly added, "This was not created by random error. Someone intentionally buried it where almost nobody would ever think to search." For the first time since entering the hangar, Aubrey Sinclair looked at the quiet mechanic not as a maintenance technician covered in grease, but as the only person in the building who seemed able to understand what everyone else had completely overlooked. No one moved. The enormous display continued showing the unfamiliar lines of code, while the quiet hum of the aircraft echoed through the hangar like a question waiting for someone brave enough to answer it. Aubrey Sinclair looked from the monitor to Nathan Reed, no longer seeing the grease on his work shirt before noticing the confidence in his eyes. It was not the confidence of someone trying to prove himself. It was the calm certainty of someone who had already solved the puzzle long before anyone else realized there was one. The lead flight engineer slowly cleared his throat. "Where did you learn to recognize adaptive flight synchronization at this level?" Nathan hesitated for only a moment before answering. "A long time ago." The engineer frowned. "No maintenance certification teaches this." Before Nathan could respond, one of the visiting investors stepped closer to the display. His silver hair and military posture drew quiet respect from everyone nearby. He studied Nathan's face carefully before his expression suddenly changed. "Reed?" he asked. Nathan turned politely. "Yes, sir." The older man stared at him for several seconds. "Nathan Reed, Falcon Experimental Flight Program." The entire room fell silent once again. Nathan gave a small, respectful nod. "That was many years ago." The investor smiled with genuine disbelief. "Many years ago, you were considered one of the finest experimental test pilots I ever supervised." Several executives exchanged confused glances. Aubrey looked at the older man. "You know him?" "Know him," the retired Air Force colonel replied softly. "He flew aircraft that most pilots were never allowed to touch. He had an extraordinary ability to detect flight instability before instruments confirmed it. His evaluations helped redesign safety systems still used in advanced aviation today." Every eye in the hangar shifted toward Nathan. The quiet mechanic who had been dismissed only hours earlier suddenly seemed like someone nobody had truly known. Aubrey spoke carefully. "Why would someone with that background be working as a maintenance technician?" Nathan answered with the same steady voice he had used all morning. "Because life changes." He looked briefly toward the polished floor before continuing. "After my wife passed away, my daughter needed a father more than the aviation industry needed another test pilot. I chose the job that let me come home every evening." His words carried no regret, only peace. Even the engineers who had questioned him lowered their eyes with quiet respect. The retired colonel smiled gently. "You walked away from a remarkable career." Nathan nodded. "I walked towards something more important." Aubrey felt an unexpected weight settle over her heart. She remembered the sarcastic smile she had given him only yesterday. She remembered calling him a maintenance technician as though that title defined his worth. Yet the man standing before her had never mentioned his accomplishments, never corrected anyone, and never asked for recognition. He had simply tried to protect an aircraft because it was the right thing to do. The lead engineer looked back at the hidden software layer displayed across the monitor. If Nathan is correct, someone intentionally concealed this adaptive module inside the secondary control architecture. Nathan stepped closer and enlarged another section of the code. "There is more." His finger rested beside a sequence of encrypted identifiers. This coding style is familiar. It was designed to hide something, not to improve performance. Aubrey looked toward the growing lines of encrypted data appearing across the screen. The demonstration had ended. The business presentation had been forgotten. Contracts worth millions no longer mattered. Standing inside the quiet hangar, surrounded by executives, engineers, and investors who had stopped speaking altogether, Aubrey realized she had not just underestimated a mechanic. She had mistaken extraordinary humility for ordinary ability, and the greatest secret hidden inside her company had only begun to reveal itself because one single father chose to listen when everyone else only looked. Nathan Reed stood quietly before the glowing monitor while rows of encrypted aviation code continued scrolling across the screen. Around him, executives, engineers, investors, and flight crews remained completely silent, no longer questioning why a maintenance technician understood software architecture better than specialists who had spent years designing corporate aircraft systems. Nathan carefully enlarged another section of the hidden programming before pointing toward a sequence buried beneath several authentication layers. "This was never intended to be discovered during routine inspections," he said calmly. The lead engineer leaned closer. "Can you tell what it is protecting?" Nathan studied the pattern for several moments before answering. "Not protecting, concealing." He requested access to archived engineering records, and after a brief hesitation, Aubrey Sinclair personally authorized unrestricted access to every technical database inside Sinclair Aero Capital. Within minutes, hundreds of archived design files appeared across multiple displays surrounding the hangar. Nathan quietly compared software signatures, revision histories, and engineering approvals until one document caused him to stop scrolling altogether. The retired Air Force colonel noticed immediately. "What did you find?" Nathan looked up slowly. "This authorization signature belongs to an engineer who left the company 6 years ago." Aubrey frowned. "He retired before I became chief executive officer." Nathan nodded. "According to these records, yes." He opened another engineering file before placing both documents side by side. But these two signatures were created almost 3 years apart using identical encryption timing. The lead software engineer stared at the comparison. "That should not be possible," Nathan calmly replied, "unless someone copied the original authorization credentials after he left." Another uncomfortable silence settled across the hangar. Nathan continued tracing hidden pathways inside the software until one final encrypted storage partition appeared. There, he gently pressed several commands into the diagnostic console. The system requested multiple security approvals before unlocking a concealed archive no ordinary maintenance inspection would ever access. Hundreds of engineering drawings filled the screens. Fuel optimization algorithms, adaptive flight control models, proprietary simulation data, patent documentation. Every page carried Sinclair Aero Capital ownership markings dating back years before a competing aerospace corporation had claimed to invent nearly identical technology. Aubrey covered her mouth in disbelief. "Those are our original research files." Nathan nodded once. "Someone hid them instead of deleting them." The chief legal officer hurried toward the display. His eyes widened as he opened patent registration records stored beside the technical documents. These timestamps predate the competitor's filings by almost 18 months. Investors began quietly exchanging astonished glances. The company's outside legal counsel looked toward Aubrey with growing excitement. "If these files are authenticated, they establish original intellectual property ownership." Nathan continued reviewing the archive without celebration. "There is more." He opened one final folder labeled only with a numerical project code. Inside rested correspondence documenting an abandoned licensing agreement that independent financial analysts had valued at nearly $99 million before it mysteriously disappeared from company records years earlier. The legal officer slowly removed his glasses. "This is the missing transaction," Aubrey whispered almost to herself. $99 million. Nathan looked toward her with the same calm expression he had carried from the beginning. The value was never truly lost. The evidence was simply hidden where nobody thought to listen. His words settled over the room with remarkable weight. No one applauded. No one celebrated. Even the investors remained still, understanding they were witnessing something far greater than an unexpected financial discovery. They were watching quiet integrity uncover the truth that pride, assumptions, and hurried judgment had overlooked. Aubrey looked at Nathan for a long moment before lowering her eyes in silent humility, realizing the greatest asset her company had nearly ignored was never the aircraft resting beneath the hangar lights. It was the quiet single father who had listened carefully enough to hear what millions of dollars of technology had been trying to say all along. The discovery inside the hidden archive changed the atmosphere of the entire hangar, yet Nathan Reed accepted neither praise nor attention. While attorneys hurried to preserve digital records and engineers carefully copied every recovered file, he quietly closed the diagnostic console, returned the borrowed tablet to the maintenance supervisor, and gathered the same worn toolbox he had carried every morning for years. Aubrey Sinclair noticed him walking toward the employee parking lot before the celebration around her had even begun. "Nathan," she called. He stopped and turned with the same respectful expression he had shown since the day they met. "Yes, ma'am." She hesitated, suddenly realizing that every carefully prepared business speech she had ever delivered meant very little in that moment. "Would you give me a few minutes?" Nathan nodded gently. "Of course." Less than an hour later, Aubrey's white sedan slowly entered the quiet suburban neighborhood where Nathan lived. She had declined security escorts, company photographers, and executive assistants. For the first time in years, she wanted no audience. She wanted only honesty. Nathan invited her onto the small front porch where two rocking chairs overlooked a neatly trimmed lawn filled with colorful wildflowers that Grace had planted with her father during the spring. Through the open front door, Aubrey could hear gentle laughter coming from inside the house. Grace sat on the living room floor assembling a wooden airplane model while humming softly to herself. She looked up, smiled warmly, and waved without hesitation. "Hello." Aubrey smiled back, unexpectedly touched by the little girl's kindness. "Hello, Grace." Nathan poured 2 glasses of iced tea before sitting across from Aubrey beneath the shade of an old oak tree. Neither spoke immediately. A gentle breeze carried the distant sound of airplanes climbing into the Texas sky. Finally, Aubrey looked directly at him. "I owe you an apology." Nathan listened quietly. "I judged you before I knew you. I saw grease on your sleeves instead of wisdom. I saw your job title instead of your character. I believed authority made me right." She lowered her eyes. "I was wrong." Nathan remained silent for several moments before answering. "Thank you for saying that." Aubrey reached into a leather portfolio resting beside her chair and carefully placed a folder on the small wooden table between them. Inside is an offer to become Chief Aviation Innovation Advisor for Sinclair Aero Capital. Complete authority over flight safety development. Leadership of our engineering review program. Full access to every research division. The compensation reflects the responsibility. Nathan opened the folder slowly. The proposed agreement represented a life-changing opportunity, complete with long-term financial security for Grace and resources most aviation experts only dreamed of receiving. He closed the folder just as carefully as he had opened it. Aubrey watched him anxiously. "You are going to say no, aren't you?" Nathan smiled kindly. "Not because the offer lacks generosity." He looked toward Grace, who was proudly holding up her finished wooden airplane from inside the living room window. "Every decision I make teaches my daughter something about the kind of man she should trust." Aubrey nodded quietly. "I understand." Nathan continued gently. "If I accept today because everyone suddenly knows who I used to be, then I teach her that respect belongs to titles." He rested one hand lightly on the folder. "I would rather she learn that respect belongs to character." Aubrey felt unexpected emotion fill her eyes. She had arrived hoping money and opportunity could repair what pride had broken. Instead, she discovered something far more valuable than professional brilliance. She discovered a father whose greatest achievement was not hidden inside aviation records or recovered patents, but inside the quiet example he lived every ordinary day. As the evening sun settled across the peaceful neighborhood, Aubrey carried the unsigned contract back to her car, understanding that trust could never be purchased. It could only be earned through patient actions, honest change, and the humility to become better than the person who had once walked into the hangar believing she already knew everything. 3 days later, every employee of Sinclair Aero Capital received an unexpected invitation to gather inside the main executive hangar before the beginning of the workday. Engineers stood beside accountants. Flight crews stood beside receptionists. Mechanics stood beside senior executives. Even the investors who had witnessed the discovery earlier in the week quietly returned, curious about why Aubrey Sinclair had postponed every scheduled meeting for this single event. The polished business jet remained parked beneath bright hangar lights, but this morning it was no longer the center of attention. A simple wooden podium had been placed in front of the aircraft instead. At exactly 9 o'clock, Aubrey stepped forward wearing the same elegant white business suit she had worn the day she first mocked Nathan Reed. She looked across hundreds of faces before speaking. "Today, I am not here to celebrate a financial victory." The hangar became completely still. "I am here to acknowledge a personal failure." No one moved. No one whispered. Aubrey continued with a calm voice that carried far more humility than authority. "Several days ago, I judged a man by his uniform instead of his character. I believed experience belonged only to impressive titles. I ignored a warning because it came from someone I had already decided to underestimate." She paused before looking toward the maintenance team. "That mistake belongs entirely to me." The silence grew even deeper. She then announced a series of permanent changes that would reshape the company. Every technical concern, regardless of job title, would receive an independent review before any major operational decision. A new innovation council would include mechanics, technicians, pilots, engineers, and safety specialists working together as equals. Leadership training would begin with listening before directing. Recognition programs would honor quiet service as much as public achievement. Finally, she lifted a handwritten letter. "There is one more change," she said softly. "I wrote this after visiting Nathan and Grace." She read only a few sentences. "Real leadership is not measured by how many people obey your voice. It is measured by how many people feel respected enough to speak honestly before a mistake becomes a disaster." When she finished reading, she folded the letter without expecting applause. Instead, she looked toward the back of the hangar where Nathan stood beside the maintenance crew in the same clean work shirt he had always worn. "Nathan," she said gently, "would you please join me?" Every head turned as he walked forward without hurry. He did not wear a tailored suit. He did not seek attention. He simply climbed the small platform with the quiet confidence of a man whose identity had never depended on recognition. Aubrey stepped aside and offered him the microphone. Nathan looked across the crowd before smiling warmly. "I do not have a speech," he said. A few people smiled. "I only have a request. The next time someone with dirty hands offers you honest advice, listen before you decide how much that person is worth." His words settled over the hangar with remarkable weight. There were no dramatic gestures, no raised voices, only truth spoken with grace. After several long moments, the retired Air Force colonel slowly began to clap. One engineer followed, then another. Soon the entire hangar stood together in respectful applause, not because Nathan had uncovered millions of dollars in hidden value, but because he had reminded everyone that dignity never depends on job titles. As the applause gently faded, Aubrey quietly placed the unsigned executive contract back into her portfolio. She no longer intended to persuade Nathan with promises. She had decided she would first build the kind of company worthy of earning his trust, believing that genuine respect, like the finest aircraft ever built, could only rise after every hidden weakness had been honestly repaired. 1 year passed quietly, and the transformation at Sinclair Aero Capital became visible long before anyone read another financial report. The company had recovered every piece of intellectual property hidden inside the encrypted archive, secured the rights to the recovered aviation technology, and completed the landmark agreement once valued at $99 million. Yet employees rarely spoke first about the business success. They spoke about the culture. Mechanics now attended engineering meetings. Pilots listened to technicians before every major demonstration. Executives regularly walked the hangar floor without cameras or announcements. The greatest change had never appeared on a balance sheet. It lived inside the way people treated one another. On a clear autumn afternoon, the main hangar filled once again, but this gathering felt entirely different from the one held a year earlier. Families stood beside employees. Young interns chatted with veteran pilots. Engineers laughed with maintenance crews. Grace Reed walked hand in hand with her father, proudly wearing a small aviation academy jacket she had earned after joining a youth flight education program sponsored by Sinclair Aero Capital. Nathan Reed had accepted Aubrey Sinclair's leadership invitation months earlier, but only after every promise she made had become reality. He did not return because of the position, the salary, or the recognition. He returned because he believed a company willing to learn deserved the chance to become something better. Now serving as Chief Aviation Innovation Advisor, he still spent part of every week inside the hangar with mechanics, listening to engines before opening spreadsheets, reminding every new employee that wisdom often arrived wearing work boots instead of polished shoes. As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the enormous glass doors, Aubrey stepped onto a simple stage without dramatic music or corporate fanfare. Her confidence no longer came from authority alone. It came from humility earned one honest decision at a time. She smiled warmly before inviting Nathan to stand beside her. Between them rested a small wooden display case covered with a navy cloth. Aubrey carefully lifted the cloth away, revealing a worn metal pilot's wing badge that had been professionally restored after years inside Nathan's old storage box. Beneath it rested a small engraved plaque that read, "The greatest altitude is reached by those who never stop listening." The entire hangar fell silent. Aubrey looked toward Nathan with quiet gratitude. "This belonged to a remarkable pilot," she said softly. "But today we honor an even greater father, mentor, an example of character." Nathan looked at the restored wings for several long moments before smiling gently. "I thought I had left this part of my life behind," he admitted. Aubrey shook her head. "You never left it behind. You simply carried it with humility until the rest of us finally learned how to see it." Grace quietly stepped forward, took her father's hand, then reached for Aubrey's hand with the other. Neither adult spoke. Around them, hundreds of employees remained standing in complete silence. Even the aircraft resting beneath the bright hangar lights seemed to become part of the moment. Outside, a newly upgraded company jet slowly taxied toward the runway before lifting gracefully into the clear Texas sky. Nathan watched it climb until it became a bright silver shape against the horizon. Then he looked down at Grace, whose smile reflected every sacrifice he had ever made. In that peaceful moment, everyone understood the lesson that would outlast every contract, every aircraft, and every dollar ever earned. True greatness is never measured by the titles people give us or the fortunes we uncover. It is measured by the quiet dignity we choose when no one is watching, the grace we extend after being misunderstood, and the lives we live simply because kindness has always been the safest path home.